Did you know that nearly 1 in 6 people today show strong narcissistic traits? And most victims don't even realize it until it's too late. That means right now you could be living, loving, or fighting for someone who's already decided to emotionally leave you long before you even notice. These are the real signs that the narcissist no longer wants you, and the truth behind them is far darker and more psychological than you think. Here's what most people never understand. When a narcissist loses interest, they don't simply walk away. They erase you. They begin rewriting the story in their mind where they were the victim and you were the problem. By the time you're still asking, what did I do wrong, they're already emotionally gone, feeding off the confusion they left behind. Recent studies from clinical psychology show that over 80% of people who've been discarded by narcissistic partners experience symptoms similar to post-traumatic stress. That's not heartbreak, that's psychological withdrawal. And the moment you understand what's really happening beneath that silence, everything changes, because what looks like rejection is actually revelation. The game is ending, and you're about to see exactly why. Before we dive deep into this, do me one favor. Hit tap boost if YouTube shows it. And tell me in the comments, are you dealing with a male narcissist or a female one? Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. When someone with narcissistic traits begins to withdraw from you, this truth reveals itself in the smallest silences. You start to notice it first in the pauses, those moments that used to feel warm but now feel cold, uncertain. The same person who once seemed obsessed with your presence suddenly turns distant, indifferent, almost bored, and you begin to wonder, what changed? The truth is, something deep beneath the surface has shifted, something psychological, almost invisible. Freud described this as the narcissistic economy. For a narcissist, relationships are not about connection, but about energy exchange, admiration for control, affection for validation. When that balance tips, when you stop feeding their ego or start asserting your boundaries, they begin to detach. It's not random. Studies in personality psychology show that individuals with high narcissistic traits experience a measurable drop in dopamine when they no longer feel adored. It's not just emotional, it's chemical. The rush of being admired fades, and so do you in their eyes. You can feel this shift before you can explain it. They stop asking questions about you. Conversations become shorter, colder. The messages that once arrived instantly now take hours or days. It's subtle at first, and that's what makes it so disorienting. Jung called this the withdrawal of projection. When they no longer see themselves reflected in your admiration, their interest collapses. You've stopped being a mirror, and for a narcissist that means you've stopped being useful. Many people blame themselves at this stage. You replay every conversation, searching for the moment things went wrong. But what's happening has less to do with you, and more to do with the fragile structure of their self-image. Nietzsche wrote that whoever fights monsters should see to it that he does not become a monster. Narcissists live in that paradox. They fear being insignificant, yet destroy anything that threatens to make them face their insignificance. The moment you start to see through their illusion, they feel it, and that's when the retreat begins. There's tension in their silence. Silence is not absence, it's communication. It's the narcissist's way of saying, I no longer control how you feel. They weaponize it. Psychologists call this devaluation through emotional neglect. It's a tactic meant to make you question your worth, to make you chase again, to make you return to being the supply. But understanding this pattern is the first sign of freedom. When you see silence not as rejection, but as revelation, you begin to reclaim your power. Socrates believed that wisdom begins in self-questioning. Ask yourself, what am I feeling in this silence? If you sense confusion, emptiness, or fear, it's because your nervous system is still wired to seek validation from the one who withdrew it. Modern neuroscience explains this through attachment theory. The same brain regions activated during addiction light up when love and attention are suddenly removed. You're not weak for missing them. Your brain is reacting to a loss of its emotional drug. But awareness interrupts the pattern. Eckhart Tolle often speaks of presence as the antidote to pain. When you stop trying to decode their silence and instead sit with your own, you begin to hear something else, your truth. You realize that their emotional withdrawal is not a reflection of your value, but of their inner emptiness. A narcissist's silence often comes after they've sensed your awakening. When you stop reacting, they lose control. When you stop explaining, they lose their power. Silence then becomes a test, and you can choose to pass it. Many survivors describe this phase as the hardest part. They say it feels like mourning someone who's still alive, but that grief is also transformation. What you are feeling is your self-worth, trying to rise again after being buried under manipulation. The silence you hate now will become the space where you rebuild. You start to remember who you were before the control, before the confusion. And this remembrance is powerful. It's the first moment they truly lose you. Descartes once said, "I think, therefore I am." In the context of a toxic bond, this means when you begin to think clearly again, when your thoughts return to yourself, you begin to exist independently once more. That's what the narcissist fears most, not your absence, but your awakening. Because the moment you stop feeding their illusion, they are left alone with their own emptiness. So when silence comes, don't fill it. Listen to it. It's telling you the truth that their words could never admit. It's not that you weren't enough, it's that you stopped being their reflection. And that's not loss, it's liberation. The shift you feel is the beginning of your return to yourself. Every unanswered message, every quiet room, every cold glance, it's all proof that you're stepping out of their psychological gravity. You are not losing them. You're regaining you. Carl Jung once said that what we deny in ourselves, we project onto others. Narcissists live entirely through this principle. They do not fall in love with you. They fall in love with the reflection of what they believe they are through your admiration. The moment that reflection fades, when you stop validating their story, they begin to vanish, not suddenly, but strategically. It's not a disappearance born of sadness or confusion. It's a calculated retreat, a withdrawal of presence designed to make you chase again. Freud observed that the narcissistic personality is structured around a fragile ego masked by grandiosity. When the external supply of admiration decreases, their internal sense of power collapses. This collapse feels unbearable, almost like psychological death. So, instead of facing it, they escape. They look for a new source of validation, another stage where they can perform their superiority. It's not personal, it's mechanical. In psychological studies, this pattern is called narcissistic supply cycling. The narcissist constantly alternates between idealization and discard, seeking the next person who can reflect their illusion. At first, this shift is invisible. They don't leave abruptly, they fade. Texts become rare, calls turn short. Their warmth cools into indifference. What once felt like deep connection turns transactional. You start to feel you're the only one still trying. That imbalance is not your imagination, it's their new control tactic. By pulling away, they force you into pursuit, regaining the power dynamic that feeds their ego. In relationships, studies from the Journal of Personality Disorders show that individuals high in narcissistic traits are nearly twice as likely to emotionally withdraw once their partner asserts independence. The moment you stop reacting, they experience what psychologists call narcissistic injury, a blow to their inflated self-image. But instead of introspection, they rewrite the narrative. They'll tell themselves you've changed, that you've become distant, or even accuse you of being selfish. The irony is that your growth is their threat. Nietzsche wrote that the most spiritual human beings experience their most terrible hardships from others who cannot understand them. In this context, the hardship is recognizing that your self-respect threatens someone who pretends to love you. A narcissist doesn't want your authenticity, they want your obedience. Once they can no longer predict your emotions, they feel powerless. Their affection turns into coldness, their attention into punishment. The disappearing act is not about ending the relationship. It's about regaining dominance through confusion. Many people blame themselves when this happens. They think, if I just give more, they'll come back. But that's the trap. Narcissists are masters of intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological mechanism used in addiction studies. By giving affection randomly, they train your brain to crave their attention. Each moment of kindness feels like a reward after deprivation, and your mind begins to associate their inconsistency with love. This is why even intelligent, strong individuals find themselves unable to let go. It's not weakness, it's conditioning. Eckhart Tolle explains that pain persists as long as we identify with the story in our mind. The narcissist's disappearance forces that story into crisis. You start to question your worth, your memory, even your reality. That confusion is intentional. It keeps you tethered to them energetically, even when they're physically gone. What you perceive as loss is their method of maintaining control without effort. They remain in your thoughts because they've trained your emotions to respond to uncertainty. But here's the truth they never expect you to discover. Once you see the pattern, you break it. When you recognize that their distance is not about love but power, their silence loses its sting. The spell begins to fade. In therapy rooms across the world, survivors describe the same awakening, the realization that the person who vanished was never truly there. What they loved was the reflection of your light, not the essence of your soul. Socrates believed that knowledge is virtue, and ignorance is the root of suffering. The knowledge of what's truly happening, the psychology behind their retreat, becomes your freedom. You stop asking, "Why did they stop loving me?" and start understanding they were never capable of genuine love. You stop chasing closure from someone who benefits from your confusion. The disappearing act, then, is not your punishment. It's their exposure. When you no longer serve their illusion, they move on to find another mirror. But that doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've been freed from the performance. Their absence reveals the truth that was always hiding beneath the charm. Control, not connection, was the foundation. And this realization changes everything. You begin to see that love should not feel like anxiety, that respect should not depend on silence, and that the person who vanishes when they lose control never truly saw you. They only saw what you gave them. The vanishing of the narcissist is not the end of your story. It's the beginning of clarity, of self-ownership, of peace. Because when they disappear, the illusion goes with them, and in that emptiness, your real self finally has room to breathe. When the narcissist begins to lose their grip on you, their behavior doesn't end. It evolves. What was once charm turns into chaos. What was once affection becomes strategy. Freud described this as the defense of the ego through distortion. In simple terms, the narcissist cannot handle the collapse of their false image, so they manipulate reality itself to survive it. And the moment they sense you slipping away, they reach for their favorite weapon, emotional manipulation. Carl Jung wrote that, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's precisely what happens in this stage. The narcissist begins to twist your perception, gaslighting you until you doubt your own intuition. You might hear them say, "You're imagining things," or "You're too sensitive," when you confront their distance or lies. This is not random. It's psychological warfare designed to disarm you. Research from the American Journal of Psychology shows that gaslighting increases a victim's cognitive dissonance, creating a conflict between what they see and what they believe. Once you doubt your mind, you're easier to control. At this point, the narcissist no longer needs your admiration. They crave your confusion. Confusion keeps you spinning, always seeking their approval to regain balance. Eckhart Tolle often speaks of how the ego thrives on drama, because drama affirms its existence. The narcissist's ego is no different. If peace begins to return to your life, they'll disturb it. If you find clarity, they'll cloud it, because calmness to them feels like invisibility, and invisibility terrifies them. Nietzsche once said that madness is rare in individuals, but common in groups. In relationships with narcissists, that group madness becomes a private world of distortion. They rewrite history effortlessly. Yesterday's insult becomes a joke you misunderstood. Their betrayal becomes your insecurity. And if you dare to stand firm, they suddenly play the victim. It's an inversion of reality that leaves you questioning who the real manipulator is. Studies on narcissistic behavior in romantic relationships show that after emotional withdrawal, 73% of narcissists engage in guilt induction, making the partner feel responsible for their emotional state. You end up apologizing for their actions, believing you've caused their suffering. But the truth is simpler and far darker. They want control, not connection. When they realize emotional warmth no longer works, they turn to emotional coldness. This is called negative reinforcement. They withhold affection, approval, or even presence, forcing you to fight harder for scraps of their attention. It's not love, it's conditioning. And it's the same psychological principle used to train dependence in toxic bonds. Descartes once said that doubt is the origin of wisdom. When you start to question why you feel constantly guilty, why you always have to prove your worth, you're already breaking the spell. You begin to see that what you've been living is not intimacy. It's manipulation disguised as love. Every sudden mood change, every "I love you," followed by a silent treatment, is a performance meant to reset the balance of power. Real testimonies from therapists reveal that survivors of narcissistic abuse often describe a moment of awakening, a day when the manipulation becomes visible. They begin to notice the patterns, the timing of affection after conflict, the mirroring of emotions, the uncanny way the narcissist says exactly what you need to hear right before you give up. It's not intuition, it's strategy. The narcissist studies your weaknesses like a map, and each act of kindness is a calculated move to keep you entangled. Socrates believed that self-knowledge is the foundation of freedom. That's why understanding manipulation destroys its power. The narcissist operates in the dark. Once you bring awareness, their tactics collapse. Gaslighting only works on the mind that doubts itself. Silent treatments only hurt the heart that seeks validation. Once you stop seeking it, the entire structure falls apart. You begin to see that their approval was never real. It was bait. Eckhart Tolle's teachings on presence become vital here. When you stop reacting to manipulation, when you simply observe without judgment, the narcissist loses access to your emotions. They thrive on reaction. Without it, they panic, they may escalate, cry, beg, threaten, accuse, but these are just layers of the same illusion. Each one a desperate attempt to pull you back into the emotional storm. The moment you stop defending yourself, something miraculous happens. You reclaim your center. You realize that peace doesn't require their understanding, and closure doesn't come from their apology. The manipulation only had power because it touched your need to be seen, to be loved, to be understood. But once you start giving those things to yourself, the narcissist becomes irrelevant. So when they shift their tactics, when affection becomes silence, when guilt replaces love, when confusion becomes the new language, remember this: it's not the sign of your failure. It's the proof that you've begun to awaken. You're no longer feeding the illusion. You're breaking the pattern. And the moment you name manipulation for what it is, you transform it. From control into clarity, from confusion into truth, from pain into freedom. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." When a narcissist rejects you, it feels like pure chaos, confusion, self-doubt, silence that cuts deeper than words. But beneath that chaos lies something else, something the narcissist never intended to awaken: your strength. What they meant as destruction becomes transformation. And that's the paradox of their rejection. It breaks you open, but through that breaking, you discover who you truly are. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the painful separation between who we are and the illusions we've accepted about ourselves. When a narcissist pulls away, they rip off every layer of false validation you once relied on. You begin to see how much of your happiness was built on external approval. Their rejection feels unbearable at first because it mirrors every old wound: the childhood need to be enough, the fear of abandonment, the desire to be chosen. But as the days pass and the silence stretches, you start to realize something powerful. You are still here, breathing, thinking, feeling. And that means your value was never theirs to define. Descartes believed that doubt is the beginning of understanding. When someone withdraws their affection without explanation, your mind spirals into doubt. Was I too much? Not enough? Did I push them away? But if you sit with that doubt long enough, it transforms into awareness. You start to see patterns. You recognize the emotional traps, the manipulation, the cycles of validation and punishment. And that recognition, though painful, is the first step toward liberation. Because you can't heal what you don't see. Psychologists like Dr. Carol McBride have studied survivors of narcissistic relationships for decades and found that almost all of them experience a phase of profound awakening after rejection. They begin to reclaim their identity, their boundaries, their voice. What felt like abandonment turns out to be initiation, a brutal invitation to return to yourself. The narcissist rejects you not because you lack worth, but because your awakening threatens their illusion. When you start to see clearly, they lose control, and when they lose control, they run. Eckhart Tolle teaches that pain is not punishment, it's a signal that you're out of alignment with your true self. The pain of being discarded forces you to stop chasing validation and start observing your own mind. You begin to notice how often you seek approval, how quickly you attach your peace to someone else's behavior, and in that observation you find power. Because awareness is something no one, not even the most manipulative person, can take from you. There's an ancient Stoic truth that fits this perfectly. What disturbs us is not what happens, but how we interpret what happens. The narcissist's rejection is not an ending, it's a mirror. It reflects every part of you that still seeks love through control, every fear you've tried to silence with someone else's affection. When you face that mirror without judgment, you begin to see what the narcissist never could: your authenticity, your quiet resilience, the depth of your emotional world. Philosophically, rejection is one of life's most sacred teachers. Socrates believed that suffering refines the soul, that through challenge we discover wisdom. When the narcissist leaves, they think they're destroying you. But what they truly destroy is the illusion that you ever needed them to be whole. They strip away everything false, your dependence, your need for permission, your illusions of control, and what remains is something unshakable. The real you. Modern neuroscience supports this. When we experience emotional pain, the brain activates the same regions that respond to physical injury. Yet over time, those neural pathways adapt, strengthen, and create resilience. This is why people who survive emotional manipulation often emerge with greater empathy, clarity, and intuition. The brain literally rewires itself toward strength. Pain becomes data. Rejection becomes reprogramming. Nietzsche warned that those who fight monsters should see to it that they do not become one. That's the challenge after rejection, to not let bitterness consume you, to not mirror their coldness. True strength lies in remaining kind without being naive, compassionate without being controlled. It means learning that love does not demand suffering, that self-respect and empathy can coexist. And in this realization, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing, you stop explaining, you stop needing closure. Because you understand that their rejection was never about you. It was about their inability to meet you at the level of authenticity your growth demands. They were never rejecting your worth, only your awakening. The mirror they held up was distorted, but now that it's shattered, you can finally see your reflection clearly. You're not broken, you're emerging. You're not empty, you're being rebuilt. The silence that once haunted you becomes sacred space. The loneliness turns into clarity. The rejection that once crushed you becomes the very force that sets you free. The narcissist wanted to control your perception of yourself. Instead, they handed you the key to your inner world. And when you look into that philosophical mirror and see the truth, you realize the rejection was not a punishment. It was a revelation. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The moment you decide to detach from a narcissist, you are making the unconscious conscious. You're breaking the pattern that has silently governed your emotional life. It's not easy. It feels like trying to breathe underwater. But detachment is not abandonment, it's awakening. It's the quiet reclaiming of power that was always yours, but that you once believed belonged to someone else. Freud believed that human beings repeat what they do not repair. The pull you feel toward the narcissist after the breakup, the desire to check their messages to see if they've noticed your silence, is not love. It's repetition compulsion, the mind's attempt to recreate an old wound in hopes of finally healing it. But healing doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from the decision to stop repeating what broke you. And that's what detachment really is, a psychological act of rebellion. You stop feeding the addiction to approval and start nourishing self-respect. When you finally begin to pull away, something strange happens. You expect peace, but what comes first is emptiness. That's normal. Neuroscience shows that when emotional dependency ends, the brain's reward system, especially the dopamine and oxytocin pathways, goes through withdrawal. You're literally detoxing from the biochemical cocktail of hope, fear, and intermittent validation. That craving you feel isn't for the narcissist, it's for the chemical rush of the cycle. Recognizing this is the first step to breaking it. You don't fight the craving. You observe it. You learn to sit in the discomfort without reacting. And little by little, the silence that once hurt begins to heal you. Eckhart Tolle teaches that pain exists only in resistance. When you resist the reality of who the narcissist truly is, you suffer. But when you accept it, not with bitterness but with clarity, you step into freedom. Acceptance doesn't mean approval. It means seeing reality as it is without illusion. The narcissist isn't a mystery to solve, they're a pattern to outgrow. Once you stop needing their validation, their power dissolves. You see through the performance, the promises, the manipulation, and what once felt like rejection now feels like release. Philosophically, detachment is not indifference, it's mastery. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. Detachment is precisely that, reclaiming the power of perception. You stop giving emotional authority to someone unstable. You stop making their approval the currency of your peace. You become the gatekeeper of your own inner world. Psychologists today describe this as emotional regulation. When you begin to detach, your nervous system recalibrates. You no longer swing between hope and despair, love and fear. You begin to experience stability. That stability feels foreign at first because you've been trained to equate chaos with connection. But once you adjust to peace, chaos becomes intolerable. You stop craving the highs and lows and start craving calm. And in that calm, you rediscover yourself, not the version that needed to please, but the one that simply exists. There's a quiet revolution happening inside you during detachment. You start remembering small things, your interests, your laughter, your rhythm. You begin to feel energy returning to the places that were drained. This is not nostalgia, it's self-reclamation. The parts of you that were silenced start speaking again. The boundaries that were blurred start solidifying. You no longer explain your worth, you embody it. Nietzsche believed that true strength comes not from domination, but from self-overcoming. Detachment is self-overcoming in motion. You face your own dependence, your fears of being alone, your hunger for recognition, and you transcend them. You stop running from solitude and start finding power in it. You begin to understand that solitude is not emptiness, it's clarity unpolluted by noise. The very silence the narcissist used as a weapon becomes your sanctuary. Many survivors describe the moment of true detachment as strangely peaceful. It's not dramatic. There's no anger, no revenge, no emotional fireworks, just a calm realization. I don't need them anymore. That sentence is quiet, but it's revolutionary, because from that moment on, you stop orbiting around someone else's gravity. You become your own center. Descartes once said, "To be conscious is to be present to oneself." That's what detachment teaches you, to be present to your own experience without distortion, to feel pain without making it identity, to see manipulation without needing to fix it. You no longer need to prove your goodness or justify your silence. You simply stand in your truth. And that's the essence of emotional independence. It's not coldness, it's clarity. It's not rejection, it's redirection. It's not the end of love, it's the beginning of self-respect. The narcissist wanted your emotions to orbit around them. Detachment brings them home. It teaches you that peace isn't found in control, but in release. The power you thought you lost was never gone. It was just buried under the noise of someone else's drama. When you stop reacting, you stop bleeding energy. When you stop chasing, you start attracting stability. And when you stop seeking love from those who can't give it, you finally discover the deepest love of all, the one that doesn't leave when everything else does, the love of your own presence. That's detachment. That's freedom. That's where your real power begins. Carl Jung believed that the greatest gift of suffering is consciousness. When you emerge from a relationship with a narcissist, it's not just a recovery, it's a rebirth. You've stared directly into the abyss of manipulation, illusion, and false affection, and somehow you've come out alive. But more than alive, you're aware. And awareness is the one thing the narcissist can never take from you. It's your shield, your compass, your light in the dark. The person you were before didn't know the warning signs. The person you are now does. That is transformation. Freud wrote that people are compelled to repeat what they do not understand. Breaking the cycle means understanding it so deeply that it no longer seduces you. You start to see the pattern not just in your relationships, but in your choices, your boundaries, even your thoughts. You realize how often you confused attention with affection, intensity with intimacy, chaos with connection. Once you name these distortions, they lose their power. The same red flags that once felt magnetic now feel repulsive. That's not cynicism, it's wisdom earned through pain. Eckhart Tolle teaches that freedom begins the moment you stop identifying with the voice in your head that says you are not enough. The narcissist thrived on that voice. They mirrored your insecurities back to you, amplified them, then offered temporary relief disguised as love. It was a cycle of psychological hunger and brief satisfaction. But now, after the storm, you begin to hear a new voice, a quieter one. It doesn't beg or defend. It observes. It reminds you that your worth is not up for negotiation. You start to trust it more. That's the voice of your higher consciousness. Philosophically, this phase is where self-mastery begins. The Stoics understood this long ago. Epictetus wrote, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Rising beyond the narcissist means no longer reacting from old wounds. It means recognizing manipulation and choosing peace instead of participation. It means walking away not to punish, but to preserve. True power is calm. It's knowing you could engage in the same chaos, but you choose not to. You've outgrown the need for validation, and that growth is irreversible. Psychological studies show that survivors who actively process their trauma through reflection, therapy, or journaling develop what's called post-traumatic growth. They become more empathetic, self-aware, and resilient than before. You begin to notice it. You're no longer drawn to loud energy. You value silence, you sense manipulation faster. You recognize emotional games and step aside before they even start. What used to break you now informs you. The pain that once made you reactive now makes you perceptive. Nietzsche said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." Your why begins to shift. It's no longer about proving your worth to anyone. It's about living in alignment with truth. You realize that peace is not passive. It's a disciplined state of mind. It's choosing boundaries even when your heart still cares. It's understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It means release. You let go not because they deserve it, but because you deserve peace. Many people, once they heal, feel the pull to go back, to test if the narcissist has changed, to see if the story could have a better ending. But here's what psychology and philosophy both confirm. The lesson repeats until it's learned. Narcissists rarely change because their survival depends on denial. The only change that matters is yours. You've learned to see clearly, to trust your instincts, to stand in solitude without fear. That clarity is your armor. And the moment you honor it, the cycle ends. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. What you've lived through has forced examination of love, of power, of self, and from that comes wisdom that can't be faked. You begin to recognize emotional health in others, to surround yourself with people who communicate instead of manipulate, who love without conditions, who make peace feel safe again. You stop chasing intensity and start choosing stability. That's when you realize you're not healing to attract someone better. You're healing to become someone who never settles for less again. Neuroscientists have found that emotional awareness literally rewires the brain. The more you practice conscious detachment and self-validation, the stronger your prefrontal cortex becomes, the part of the brain that governs decision-making and emotional regulation. In other words, healing isn't just spiritual, it's biological. You are physically building a mind that can no longer be hijacked by chaos. That's what real freedom looks like. Clarity rooted in the body, not just in the mind. And eventually, there comes a moment when you no longer define yourself as a survivor of narcissistic abuse. You're simply you, aware, grounded, awake. The past no longer controls you because you've integrated it. You've learned that love without respect is dependency, that empathy without boundaries is self-erasure, and that peace is not found in another person's eyes, but in your own stillness. The narcissist wanted to make you doubt your reality. But through this journey, you've become the most real version of yourself. You've learned to see manipulation without losing compassion, to face betrayal without losing trust in life. That is true transcendence. You've risen beyond them, not by revenge, not by pride, but by evolution. Now, when you look back, you don't see a tragedy. You see initiation. You see the moment your spirit stopped begging to be understood and started learning to understand itself. And that's how you never repeat the cycle, because once you know your worth deeply enough, no illusion can hold you again. You become, as Jung might say, the fully integrated self, aware of its shadows, but no longer ruled by them. That's the ultimate victory, that's the transformation.